In the bustling marketplace of ancient Rome, among the merchants and philosophers, there lived a man who would change how humanity understands freedom forever. His name was Epictetus. He was born a slave, lived in chains, and yet discovered a form of liberty so profound that even emperors would study his teachings. This was not freedom from physical bondage, though he would eventually gain that too. This was something far more radical, far more transformative. It was freedom of the mind, freedom of the soul, a freedom that no person, no circumstance, no fate could ever take away. What you are about to hear is the complete philosophical system of this remarkable man. A system that begins with a simple observation about what we can and cannot control, and builds into a comprehensive guide for living with tranquility, dignity, and purpose, in a world that often seems designed to strip us of all three. Epictetus did not write his philosophy in books. He taught it in conversations, in dialogues with his students, in responses to their deepest questions about how to live well. His student Arian recorded these teachings, preserving them for us across 2,000 years. The philosophy we will explore is not abstract theory meant for academics. It is practical wisdom for daily life. It addresses the questions that keep you awake at night. How do you find peace when everything feels out of control? How do you maintain your dignity when others treat you unjustly? How do you love without becoming enslaved to another person's actions? How do you face death, loss, and suffering without being destroyed by them? How do you develop an unshakable inner strength that no external force can touch? Epictetus answers these questions with a clarity and directness that cuts through centuries of philosophical complexity. His insights are as relevant today as they were in ancient Rome, perhaps even more so, because we live in an age where the illusion of control has become more elaborate and convincing than ever before. We have technology that promises to control our environment, medicines that promise to control our bodies, social systems that promise to control outcomes. And yet we suffer perhaps more than any previous generation from anxiety, depression, and the feeling that our lives are spinning out of our control. Epictetus would not be surprised by this modern predicament. He understood something fundamental about the human condition that most of us spend our entire lives refusing to accept. Most of what we worry about, most of what we strive for, most of what we believe will make us happy, is completely outside our control. And this is not a problem to be solved through better technology or social engineering. It is the basic structure of reality itself. The weather will do what it does regardless of our wishes. Other people will think and act according to their own judgments, not ours. Our bodies will age and eventually fail. Events will unfold according to causes we cannot fully understand or influence. This might sound like a recipe for despair. If we cannot control most of what matters, why try at all? But Epictetus discovered that accepting this truth is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of genuine freedom. Because while we cannot control external events, we have absolute and complete control over something far more important: our own minds, our judgments about events, our responses to circumstances, our character, and how we choose to live. This internal domain is our true self, and it is the only place where real freedom can exist. We will explore this philosophy in depth, moving through its key insights systematically. We will examine what it means to distinguish between what is in our control and what is not. We will understand how our judgments create our suffering, and how changing those judgments can liberate us. We will learn about the development of character and virtue as the only reliable source of happiness. We will explore the Stoic understanding of living in harmony with nature and accepting fate. We will look at how to love others without becoming enslaved to them. We will confront death and loss with the equanimity of a philosopher, and we will see how all these elements come together into a complete approach to life. Prepare yourself for a journey into practical wisdom. This is not philosophy as intellectual entertainment. This is philosophy as a way of life, as medicine for the soul, as training for the art of living well, regardless of circumstances. Before we dive into the philosophy itself, we must understand the man who taught it. Because Epictetus's life is not separate from his teachings. It is the living proof of their truth. He was born around 50 CE in Hierapolis, a city in ancient Phrygia, which is now part of modern Turkey. His very name tells you something important about his origins. Epictetus is not a proper name. It is a Greek word that means acquired or gained. It is what you would call a slave, a piece of property, a thing that belongs to someone else. From his earliest years, Epictetus belonged to Epaphroditus, a wealthy freedman who served in the court of the Roman Emperor Nero. Try to imagine what this meant for a sensitive and intelligent young man. Every moment of his day belonged to another person, where he went, what he did, when he slept, what he ate. None of these basic elements of human existence were under his control. He could be beaten for displeasing his master. He could be sold to another owner at any moment. He had no legal rights, no social standing, no hope of conventional success or recognition. And yet, this man, who had less external freedom than almost anyone in Roman society, discovered a form of internal freedom that would influence philosophers, emperors, and spiritual seekers for 2 millennia. How did he do this? Not by denying his circumstances or pretending they did not matter, not by becoming bitter or resentful about his fate, and not by waiting for external circumstances to change before he could begin to live philosophically. Instead, Epictetus made a radical observation. He noticed that even as a slave, even with almost no control over external circumstances, there remained one domain that was entirely his own: his mind, his ability to judge situations, his capacity to respond to circumstances with dignity rather than despair, his power to develop his character regardless of his social position. This insight became the foundation of his entire philosophical system. We know very little about Epictetus's early life beyond his enslavement. But we do know that at some point he gained access to education. Perhaps Epaphroditus recognized his intelligence and allowed him to attend lectures. Perhaps he managed to study in secret. What matters is that he encountered Stoic philosophy through the teaching of Musonius Rufus, one of the leading Stoic philosophers of the 1st century. This encounter changed everything. Stoicism provided Epictetus with a framework for understanding his experience. It taught him that virtue is the only true good, that external circumstances are ultimately indifferent to human happiness, and that the wise person can maintain tranquility regardless of fortune or misfortune. These ideas were not mere abstractions for Epictetus. They were tools for surviving and transcending his circumstances. They were practical techniques for maintaining his humanity in conditions designed to strip it away. At some point, Epictetus gained his freedom. We do not know exactly when or how. Perhaps Epaphroditus freed him out of respect for his philosophical abilities. Perhaps he purchased his own freedom. Or perhaps he was freed when Epaphroditus fell from power after Nero's death. What matters is that physical freedom, when it came, did not fundamentally change Epictetus's philosophy. He had already achieved something more important than the absence of chains. He had achieved mastery over his own mind. After gaining his freedom, Epictetus began teaching philosophy in Rome. He attracted students from across the social spectrum, from wealthy aristocrats to common people seeking wisdom. His teaching style was direct, conversational, and intensely practical. He did not lecture on abstract metaphysics or engage in clever logical arguments for their own sake. He addressed the real problems his students faced: how to deal with difficult family members, how to handle social pressure to conform to corrupt practices, how to maintain integrity in the face of threats, how to face illness and death with equanimity. This phase of Epictetus's teaching career ended abruptly in 93 CE, when Emperor Domitian expelled all philosophers from Rome. Domitian feared that philosophers were encouraging resistance to his increasingly tyrannical rule, and he was probably right. Stoic philosophy, with its emphasis on virtue over external success, and its teaching that the wise person should fear nothing but moral corruption, was indeed subversive to autocratic power. Epictetus relocated to Nicopolis in northwestern Greece, where he established a school that would become one of the most influential philosophical institutions of the ancient world. Students traveled from across the Roman Empire to study with him. Among them was a young man named Arrian, who had become one of Rome's most distinguished historians and military commanders. Arrian recognized that he was in the presence of extraordinary wisdom, and he took careful notes of Epictetus's discourses and informal conversations. These notes became the Discourses, 4 books containing detailed records of Epictetus's teachings. Arrian also compiled the Enchiridion, or Handbook, a concise manual of Stoic practice drawn from the longer discourses. These texts are all we have of Epictetus's philosophy, since he himself wrote nothing, but they are enough. In them, we encounter a voice of remarkable clarity and authority, speaking directly to the reader across centuries, addressing concerns that remain as pressing today as they were in ancient Rome. Epictetus taught in Nicopolis for the rest of his life, which probably ended sometime around 135 CE. He lived simply, never seeking wealth or fame. He was said to have kept an iron lamp in his house, an object so humble that even thieves would not bother stealing it. Yet this man, who owned almost nothing and had been born owning nothing, not even himself, transmitted a philosophy of such power that it would be studied by emperors and influenced the development of early Christianity. The most famous student of Epictetus's teachings was the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who studied his works intensively and filled his own philosophical journal, the Meditations, with Stoic principles learned from Epictetus. Here was the ultimate validation of Epictetus's insight. The man who had been a slave taught philosophy to the man who ruled the world. And what did the emperor learn? The same thing Epictetus learned in bondage: that true freedom comes from within, that virtue is the only good, and that external circumstances, whether slavery or imperial power, are ultimately indifferent to human flourishing. This reversal captures something essential about Epictetus's philosophy. It is not a philosophy for the privileged or the comfortable. It was forged in hardship and tested against the worst that life can throw at a human being. When Epictetus tells you that you can be free regardless of circumstances, this is not wishful thinking or naive optimism. It is testimony from someone who discovered this truth in the most unlikely place imaginable: in chains. We begin with the foundation of Epictetus's entire philosophical system. The opening words of the Enchiridion state it with perfect clarity: some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. This might sound obvious, almost trivial. But Epictetus understood that this simple distinction, properly understood and applied, contains the key to tranquility, freedom, and human flourishing. Everything else in his philosophy flows from getting this distinction right. What is up to us? Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions, in short, our own actions and judgments. These things are by nature free, unhindered, unimpeded. No one can force you to hold a particular opinion about an event. No one can make you desire something you do not want or avoid something you do not fear. Your inner life, your judgments about good and bad, your choices about how to respond to circumstances, these belong entirely to you. They are your domain, and no external force can touch them unless you give permission. What is not up to us? Our body, our property, our reputation, our social position, in short, everything external to our own choices and judgments. These things are by nature weak, slavish, subject to hindrance, belonging to others. Your body will age and sicken regardless of your wishes. Other people will form opinions about you according to their own judgments, not yours. Your possessions can be taken, your social position can change, your circumstances can shift in ways you neither choose nor control. This distinction seemed clear enough in theory. But Epictetus understood that human beings constantly confuse these two categories, treating things outside their control as if they were up to them, and neglecting the one domain where they have real power. This confusion is the source of almost all human suffering, frustration, and bondage. Consider a typical example. You are preparing for an important presentation at work. You stay up late rehearsing. You craft your arguments carefully. You anticipate questions and prepare responses. The day arrives and you deliver your presentation competently, but your boss seems unimpressed. She criticizes aspects of your work that you thought were strong. She overlooks points that you labored over. She gives a promotion to someone whose work you consider inferior to yours. Now, how do you respond to this situation? Most people would feel angry, disappointed, anxious. They would ruminate on what they should have done differently. They would resent their boss for failing to appreciate their effort. They would compare themselves to their colleague who received the promotion. They would worry about their future at the company. In short, they would suffer. Why do they suffer? Because they have invested their happiness and peace of mind in outcomes that are not up to them. The boss's opinion is not up to you. The promotion decision is not up to you. Your colleague's work and your boss's evaluation of it are not up to you. These things belong to the category of what Epictetus calls externals. They are outside the sphere of your control. And yet you have attached your well-being to them, making your inner state dependent on things that you can neither control nor predict. What is up to you in this situation? Your preparation was up to you. Your effort to present your ideas clearly was up to you. Your intention to do good work was up to you. Your response to the outcome is up to you. You can choose to view this situation as a personal failure or as information about your boss's preferences. You can choose to become bitter or to remain focused on doing excellent work regardless of recognition. You can choose to obsess over injustice or to accept that other people's judgments belong to them, not to you. These choices are entirely within your power. Epictetus would say that if you suffer in this situation, it is not because of what your boss did or did not do. It is because of your judgment that you need your boss's approval to be happy, your belief that you deserve recognition, your attachment to the idea that hard work should always be rewarded in ways you consider fair. These judgments are up to you. You created them and you can change them. The external event has no power to disturb you by itself. Only your judgment about the event can do that. This might seem harsh. Is Epictetus telling you that you should not care about outcomes, that you should not try to succeed, that you should be indifferent to how others treat you? Not at all. He is making a much more subtle and powerful point. Care about outcomes, but do not let your happiness depend on them. Try to succeed, but measure success by your effort and intention rather than by results you cannot control. Prefer to be treated well by others, but do not base your self-worth on their treatment of you. The key insight is this: when you focus your concern and effort on what is truly up to you, your own choices and judgments and character, you become invulnerable. Nothing external can disturb you because you have not given external things the power to determine your inner state. When you focus your concern on externals, things that are not truly up to you, you become vulnerable to disappointment, anxiety, and suffering. You have made your well-being hostage to forces beyond your control. This is why Epictetus says that freedom and happiness come from understanding and accepting this distinction. The person who clearly grasps what is and is not up to them will never be forced, never hindered, never troubled. They will go through life without complaint, harming no one, helping many. They will have what they desire and avoid what they want to avoid. Not because they control external circumstances, but because they have properly aligned their desires and aversions with what is actually in their power. Think about how radical this teaching is. Epictetus is telling you that you can be completely free right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances. You do not need to wait for conditions to improve. You do not need more money, better health, different relationships, or a changed situation. Freedom is available to you immediately, as soon as you stop trying to control what you cannot control and focus all your energy on the one thing you can control, your own mind. But this is not as easy as it sounds. Human beings are naturally inclined to focus on externals. We worry about our health, our wealth, our reputation, our loved ones. We spend enormous energy trying to control outcomes that are not truly up to us. We make elaborate plans to secure our future, to protect ourselves from loss, to ensure that things go the way we want them to go. And we suffer when, inevitably, reality fails to conform to our plans. Epictetus understood this tendency deeply. He did not expect his students to suddenly stop caring about health, wealth, and reputation. That would be inhuman. But he taught them to hold these things lightly, to prefer them without depending on them, to pursue them without becoming enslaved to them. He distinguished between our natural preferences and our well-being. It is natural to prefer health to sickness, wealth to poverty, praise to blame. But your well-being, your inner peace and freedom, should not depend on whether you get what you prefer. This is the heart of Stoic practice. You act in the world, you pursue your goals, you work to improve your circumstances. But you recognize that outcomes are not entirely up to you. You do your best and accept whatever results. You care about external things, but you do not let them determine whether you have a good life. Your good life depends entirely on something that is always within your power: your character, your choices, your judgments, your will. When you truly internalize this distinction, something remarkable happens. You become more effective in the world, not less. Because you are no longer paralyzed by fear of outcomes you cannot control. You are no longer distracted by anxiety about what others think. You are no longer wasting energy on resentment about past injustices or worry about future possibilities. You focus all your attention and effort on what you can actually influence, your own actions and responses. And paradoxically, by caring less about outcomes, you often achieve better outcomes. This is because attachment to outcomes creates tension, anxiety, and poor judgment. When you desperately need something to happen a certain way, you become rigid and unable to adapt to changing circumstances. When you fear failure intensely, you often create the very outcome you feared through your anxious behavior. When you depend on others' approval, you cannot act authentically and effectively. But when you focus on your own excellence, on doing what is right regardless of outcomes, on maintaining your character regardless of circumstances, you develop a kind of power that external forces cannot touch. Most people believe that events make them feel certain ways. The traffic jam makes you angry. The criticism makes you sad. The uncertainty makes you anxious. The loss makes you despair. But Epictetus teaches something profoundly different and liberating. Events do not make you feel anything. Your judgments about events create your emotions and suffering. This insight is the key to freedom from the tyranny of circumstances. Consider what happens when someone insults you. The insult itself is just sounds in air or marks on a screen. These physical phenomena have no inherent power to hurt you. What hurts is your judgment that the insult diminishes you, that it reveals something shameful about you, that you should be respected and are not being respected. These judgments, not the insult itself, create your suffering. Change the judgments, and the insult loses its power. Epictetus asks you to imagine that someone tells you your child is dead. The statement itself is just words. You feel devastated not because of the words, but because of your judgment that this loss is catastrophic, that your happiness depended on your child living, that you cannot bear this event. These judgments are what create your suffering, not the event itself. This might seem like a cruel or absurd claim. How could the death of a child not be inherently terrible? But Epictetus is not saying that such losses do not matter. He is making a more subtle point about where our suffering actually comes from. The Stoics distinguished between the initial, involuntary response to an event, which they called the first movement of the soul, and our judgment about the event, which is within our control. When you hear that someone you love has died, you will feel a physical shock, a biological response. This first movement is natural and not something to be eliminated. But what follows, the prolonged suffering, the despair, the feeling that life is not worth living, these come from your judgments, your belief that you cannot bear this loss, your idea that your happiness required this person to be alive, your thought that the universe is cruel and unjust. These judgments are what transform a natural moment of pain into extended suffering. And these judgments are up to you. You can examine them, question them, and potentially change them. You can judge instead that loss is part of life, that your happiness does not depend on any particular external circumstance, that you will honor your loved one by living well despite their absence. These different judgments would produce different emotional outcomes. Same event, different judgments, different experience. This teaching gives you tremendous power. If your suffering comes from your judgments rather than from events, then you can reduce your suffering by changing your judgments. You do not need to wait for the world to change. You do not need events to go your way. You can work directly on the source of your suffering, your own mind. But here is where most people misunderstand Epictetus. They think he is telling them to deny their feelings, to pretend that losses do not hurt, to become cold and emotionless. This is not at all what he means. He is not saying that you should have no preferences or that you should be indifferent to what happens. He's saying that your well-being should not depend on your preferences being satisfied. You can prefer that your loved ones live long lives. You can feel sad when they die. You can miss them terribly. But you should not judge that their death makes a good life impossible for you, that you cannot be happy without them, that the universe has wronged you. The key is to distinguish between natural preferences and judgments that create suffering. It is natural to prefer pleasure to pain, success to failure, life to death. These preferences are built into us and serve important functions. But suffering comes when we add judgments to these preferences. When we move from "I would prefer not to be sick" to "I cannot be happy while sick," from "I would prefer others to approve of me" to "I need approval to have worth," from "I want my children to be safe" to "I will be destroyed if anything happens to them." These additions, these judgments about what you need to be happy, are what imprison you. Because you have made your happiness dependent on things outside your control, and this means you can never be secure. External circumstances change constantly. People die, health fails, fortune shifts. If your well-being depends on these things remaining a certain way, you are building your house on sand. The moment circumstances change, your peace collapses. But if you learn to distinguish between what you prefer and what you need for a good life, you become free. You can prefer health but be content while sick, knowing that your virtue and character do not depend on your body's condition. You can prefer success but remain at peace with failure, knowing that you maintained your integrity regardless of outcomes. You can love your family deeply while accepting that their lives are not entirely in your control, that they are mortal beings subject to fate. This is not coldness or detachment. This is wisdom. It is learning to love without becoming enslaved, to care without becoming desperate, to prefer without becoming dependent. These distinctions might seem subtle, but they make all the difference between a life of anxiety and a life of tranquility. Epictetus teaches a practice for examining and changing your judgments. When something disturbs you, when you feel anger or anxiety or despair, pause. Do not immediately act on the emotion. Instead, examine the judgment creating the emotion. What are you telling yourself about this situation? What do you believe must be true for you to be happy? What outcome are you insisting must happen? These beliefs are where your suffering lives. Then question these judgments. Do you really need this outcome to have a good life? Is it actually within your control? Are you making your well-being dependent on something external and unpredictable? Could you live well even if this preference is not satisfied? Often, when you examine your judgments carefully, you discover that they are exaggerated, unnecessary, or based on confused thinking. You are demanding that reality conform to your wishes, rather than accepting reality as it is and maintaining your virtue within it. This practice requires constant vigilance. Our default mode is to blame circumstances for our emotional states. He made me angry. This situation is unbearable. I need things to be different. These ways of thinking give away your power. They make you a victim of circumstances. But when you take responsibility for your judgments, you reclaim your power. You recognize that no one makes you angry. You make yourself angry through your judgment that you have been wronged and that this wrong is intolerable. The situation is not unbearable. Your judgment that you cannot bear it is what makes it feel unbearable. You do not need things to be different. You are choosing to make your well-being conditional on things being different. This might sound like blaming yourself for your suffering, like adding guilt to pain. But that is not what Epictetus intends. He is not saying you are bad for having these judgments. He is saying you have the power to change them. This is good news, not bad news. Your suffering is not inevitable. It is not imposed on you by the world. It arises from judgments you have learned, and you can learn different judgments. You can train yourself to respond to circumstances with wisdom rather than with reactive emotion. What makes a human life good? Most people would answer with some combination of health, wealth, pleasure, success, love, and respect. These are the things we pursue, the things we believe will make us happy. But Epictetus teaches something radically different. He claims that none of these external things are truly good. They are what the Stoics call indifferents, things that have no bearing on whether you live a good life. The only thing that is truly good, the only thing that can make your life genuinely worthwhile, is virtue, your character, your excellence as a human being. This seems counterintuitive at first. How can health be indifferent? Obviously, it is better to be healthy than sick. How can wealth be indifferent? Obviously, it is better to have resources than to lack them. But Epictetus is making a more subtle and profound point. These things may be preferable, but they are not good in the deepest sense. Because you can have them and live a terrible life, or lack them and live an excellent life. Virtue is the only thing that invariably makes your life good, and vice is the only thing that invariably makes it bad. Consider a wealthy person who is cruel, dishonest, and cowardly. Is this a good life? They have health, wealth, power, and pleasure. But their character is corrupt. They harm others and degrade themselves. They live in fear of losing what they have, and anxiety about what others think of them. This is not a good life, despite all the externals that are supposed to make life good. Now consider a poor person who is kind, honest, and brave. They lack wealth and perhaps suffer physical hardship. But they maintain their integrity. They help others when they can. They face difficulties with courage. This is a good life, despite lacking the externals that are supposed to be necessary for happiness. The difference is virtue, character, the quality of your will and judgment. This is what determines whether you live well or badly, and this is entirely up to you. No external circumstance can force you to be cruel or cowardly. No misfortune can make you dishonest. No person can make you selfish. These things come from your choices, your judgments, your character. And since they are up to you, your happiness is entirely up to you. This is why Epictetus teaches that virtue is the only good, not because other things do not matter at all, but because virtue is the only thing that is both necessary and sufficient for a good life. Health without virtue is not enough. Wealth without virtue is not enough. Success without virtue is not enough. But virtue alone is enough. The virtuous person can live well in any circumstances, while the vicious person will suffer even in the most favorable conditions. What does Epictetus mean by virtue? He's following the Stoic tradition that identifies 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. Wisdom is the knowledge of what is truly good and bad, the ability to judge rightly about what matters. Justice is giving each person their due, treating others fairly and with respect. Courage is facing difficulty and fear without losing your composure or abandoning your principles. Moderation is restraining desires and impulses, not being controlled by pleasure or passion. These virtues together constitute excellence of character, the development of your humanity to its fullest potential. But virtue for Epictetus is not just abstract moral qualities. It is practical wisdom applied to daily life. It is knowing how to respond to each situation in a way that maintains your character and fulfills your nature as a rational being. When someone insults you, virtue is responding without anger or retaliation, recognizing that their insult reflects their judgment, not your worth. When you face loss, virtue is accepting it with equanimity, knowing that external things were never really yours. When you are tempted to act selfishly, virtue is choosing what is right over what is immediately pleasant. This understanding of virtue as the only good has profound practical implications. It means that you can stop chasing external goods as if they were the key to happiness. You do not need more money, better health, or higher status to live well. You need only to develop your character. This is tremendously liberating. Because character development is entirely within your power, you can work on becoming more wise, just, courageous, and moderate, regardless of your circumstances. You can make progress on what truly matters, even if your external situation never improves. It also means that you can stop fearing external evils as if they could really harm you. Poverty cannot make you a bad person. Sickness cannot corrupt your character. Insults cannot touch your virtue. Death cannot take away what is truly yours. The only thing that can harm you is your own vice, your own moral failures, your own choices to be cruel, cowardly, dishonest, or immoderate. And these are always within your power to avoid. Epictetus uses the metaphor of an actor in a play. You are assigned a role by fate. You might be playing the role of a rich person or a poor person, a healthy person or a sick person, a success or a failure. These roles are not up to you, but how you play your assigned role is entirely up to you. You can play it well or badly. You can bring honor to the role or disgrace it. The good actor does not complain about the role assigned to them. They do not refuse to play unless they get the lead part. They take whatever role is given and play it as well as they possibly can. This is how you should live your life. Accept the circumstances you are given. They are your role in the cosmic play. but focus all your effort on playing that role with virtue. If you are poor, be poor with dignity. If you are sick, be sick with courage. If you are disrespected, bear disrespect with equanimity. The circumstances do not determine the quality of your life. How you respond to circumstances determines that, and your response is always within your control. This teaching completely reframes the question of happiness. Most people think happiness comes from having favorable circumstances. Epictetus teaches that happiness comes from being a good person, regardless of circumstances. Most people think success means getting what you want from life. Epictetus teaches that success means wanting what you already have the power to achieve: virtue, excellence of character, the development of your humanity to its fullest potential. This is why Epictetus can say, without irony, that the philosopher is the only truly happy person, not because philosophers have easier lives or better circumstances. Often the opposite is true, but because philosophers understand where happiness really comes from. They have stopped chasing externals and focused on what is truly in their power. They have developed their character to the point where they can maintain tranquility regardless of circumstances. They have learned to love their fate, whatever it brings, because they know that no external event can touch what is truly theirs. One of the central teachings of Stoic philosophy is that we should live according to nature. But what does this mean? For Epictetus, living according to nature has two aspects. First, it means accepting the natural order of the universe, the way things actually are, rather than demanding that reality conform to your wishes. Second, it means fulfilling your nature as a rational and social being, developing the capacities that make you distinctly human. Both aspects require surrendering the fantasy that the world should revolve around your preferences and accepting your place in a larger order. When Epictetus tells you to accept nature, he is not just talking about physical nature, trees and animals and weather. He is talking about the nature of reality itself, the fact that all things change and pass away, the fact that you cannot control what other people think or do, the fact that your body will age and eventually die, the fact that circumstances will often not go the way you want them to, the fact that life includes loss, difficulty, and suffering as fundamental features, not as unfortunate accidents that should not happen. Most people spend their lives in rebellion against these natural facts. They want permanence in a world of change. They want control over things that are not controllable. They want life without loss. They want security and certainty in a fundamentally uncertain existence. This rebellion is the source of enormous suffering, because you are fighting against reality itself. You are insisting that the universe should be different than it is, and the universe does not care what you think it should be. Living according to nature means surrendering this rebellion. It means accepting that the universe operates according to its own laws, not according to your preferences. It means recognizing that you are a small part of a vast cosmic order, and that this order will continue whether you approve of it or not. It means understanding that what happens is what was always going to happen, given all the causes and conditions that preceded it. You can prefer different outcomes, but you cannot rationally demand them. This might sound like fatalism or resignation. If everything is determined by nature, why bother trying to do anything? But this misunderstands the Stoic position. Epictetus is not saying that you should be passive or that your choices do not matter. He is saying that you should accept outcomes as natural, while still acting according to your nature as a rational being. Your nature includes the capacity for choice, for effort, for pursuing goals. These capacities are part of the natural order, and you should use them. But you should not demand that your efforts always produce the results you want. You should do your part and accept whatever follows. This is the famous Stoic distinction between what is up to us and what follows from what is up to us. Your effort is up to you. The outcome that results from your effort is not entirely up to you. It depends on countless factors outside your control. You can work hard and fail. You can do everything right and still not get the result you wanted. This is nature. Things happen according to complex causal chains that you can influence but not control. A wise person understands this. They act with full effort and commitment, but they hold outcomes lightly, accepting whatever nature produces. The second aspect of living according to nature is fulfilling your nature as a human being. Epictetus follows Aristotle in understanding human nature as fundamentally rational and social. You are not just a bundle of desires and impulses. You are a being capable of reason, reflection, and judgment. You are capable of understanding the difference between good and bad, right and wrong. You are capable of controlling your responses to circumstances rather than being controlled by them. This rational capacity is what makes you human, and developing it to its fullest is what living according to your nature means. Living according to your rational nature means using your reason to guide your life, rather than being driven by impulses and emotions. It means pausing to reflect before acting. It means examining your judgments to see if they are sound. It means developing wisdom about what truly matters and what does not. It means not being swept away by immediate desires or fears, but maintaining a broader perspective that considers your long-term well-being and your character. But you are also by nature a social being. You are born into a web of relationships and dependencies. You live in communities. You have roles and responsibilities to others. Living according to your nature means fulfilling these roles well. Being a good family member, friend, citizen, colleague, contributing to the common good, treating others with justice and respect. Recognizing that your well-being is connected to the well-being of the communities you are part of. Epictetus emphasizes that each person has multiple roles in life, and virtue consists in fulfilling each role appropriately. You are a human being, which gives you certain universal obligations to be rational and just. You are someone's child, which gives you obligations of respect and care to your parents. You might be someone's parent, which gives you obligations to raise your children well. You might be a citizen, which gives you obligations to your political community. You might be a friend, which gives you obligations of loyalty and support. These roles are not burdens imposed from outside. They are natural features of human life, and fulfilling them well is part of what it means to live according to nature. You do not get to choose whether to have roles and relationships. You only get to choose how well you fulfill them. The virtuous person recognizes their roles and works to fulfill them with excellence, not out of external compulsion, but because this is what a fully developed human being does. Living according to nature also means accepting your own nature as a mortal being. You will die. Your loved ones will die. Everything you build will eventually decay. Every relationship will end. Every possession will be lost. These are not unfortunate accidents. This is the nature of existence in the physical world. Everything that comes into being passes out of being. Everything that is composed will decompose. Everything that is born will die. Most people try not to think about this. They push away thoughts of mortality and loss. They live as if they and everyone they love will live forever. Then, when death comes, they are shocked and devastated, as if something abnormal has occurred. But Epictetus teaches that this is irrational. Death is not abnormal. It is the most natural thing in the world. Every moment, countless beings are dying. This is how nature works. To be shocked by death is to be shocked by nature itself. The Stoic response is not to become morbid or depressed, but to accept mortality as natural and to let this acceptance inform how you live. When you remember that you will die, you stop wasting time on trivial pursuits. When you remember that your loved ones are mortal, you appreciate them while they are here. When you remember that everything is temporary, you stop clinging so tightly to what you have. You hold things lightly, enjoy them while they last, and let them go when nature takes them back. This acceptance is not resignation or pessimism. It is realism combined with wisdom. By accepting the nature of reality, you stop fighting battles you cannot win. You stop demanding that life be other than it is. And paradoxically, this acceptance allows you to enjoy life more fully, because you are not constantly anxious about losing what you have, or angry about not getting what you want. You are at peace with nature, which means you are at peace with reality itself. Perhaps no aspect of Epictetus's teaching is more transformative than his instruction on desire. Most people think the key to happiness is getting what you desire. Epictetus teaches the opposite. The key to happiness is desiring what you get. This does not mean suppressing all desires or becoming indifferent to outcomes. It means fundamentally transforming the way you desire, aligning your desires with what is actually in your power and with what reality provides. Epictetus makes a radical claim. If you desire something that is not up to you, you have necessarily enslaved yourself to that thing. Your happiness now depends on whether you get it. And since it is not up to you, you have made your happiness depend on something outside your control. This is the recipe for constant anxiety, disappointment, and suffering. But if you desire only what is up to you, you can always have what you desire. You become invulnerable to disappointment because you only desire what is within your power to achieve. What can you desire that is always within your power? Only this: to use each moment well, to respond to circumstances with virtue, to maintain your character regardless of outcomes, to judge wisely about what matters. These things are always available to you. No circumstance can prevent you from trying to be virtuous. No person can stop you from maintaining your integrity. No misfortune can take away your ability to respond with wisdom and courage. These internal goods are completely reliable because they depend entirely on you. But most people do not desire these things, at least not primarily. They desire health, wealth, success, pleasure, other people's approval. And these desires make them vulnerable. Because these things are not up to them. They can work toward them, but they cannot guarantee them. Health fails despite our best efforts. Wealth disappears in economic downturns. Success is judged by others who may not appreciate us. Pleasure is temporary and often dependent on circumstances. Approval is fickle and unpredictable. Basing your happiness on these things is building on sand. Epictetus teaches a practice for transforming desire. When you desire something, first examine whether it is truly up to you. If it is an external thing, an outcome, something that depends partly on circumstances or other people's choices, then modify your desire. Instead of desiring the outcome, desire to do your best in pursuing the outcome while accepting whatever results. Instead of desiring another person's love, desire to be loving toward them while accepting that their response is up to them. Instead of desiring success, desire to act with integrity while accepting that success, as the world defines it, may or may not come. This transformation of desire does not mean you stop preferring certain outcomes. You can still prefer health to sickness, wealth to poverty, success to failure. These preferences are natural and reasonable, but you should not desire these things in the sense of making your happiness conditional on having them. You should desire only what is truly in your power, your virtue, your character, your wise response to whatever circumstances arise. When you transform your desires in this way, something remarkable happens. You become content, not in the sense of being lazy or unambitious, but in the sense of being at peace regardless of outcomes. You can work hard toward external goals without being desperate about whether you achieve them. You can care about outcomes without being devastated if they do not go your way. You can pursue success while being equally content with failure, because you know that your worth and well-being do not depend on external results. This teaching also applies to aversion, to what you want to avoid. Epictetus says that you should not be averse to anything that is not up to you. Do not be averse to death, since you cannot avoid it. Do not be averse to poverty, since it may come regardless of your efforts. Do not be averse to illness, since your body is not entirely under your control. Being averse to these things means you live in constant fear that they will happen. And this fear is itself a form of suffering. What should you be averse to? Only to vice, to acting badly, to violating your own principles, to losing your character. These are the only things that can genuinely harm you, and these are entirely up to you. You can always avoid being cruel, dishonest, cowardly, or immoderate. These are the only things you should fear, because these are the only things that make your life genuinely bad. And since they are up to you, you can protect yourself from them completely. Think about how freeing this is. You do not need to fear poverty, because poverty cannot make you a bad person. You do not need to fear death, because death cannot touch your virtue. You do not need to fear what others think of you, because their opinions cannot corrupt your character. The only thing you need to fear is your own moral failure. And that is entirely preventable through your own vigilance and effort. This does not mean you become reckless or stop taking reasonable precautions. You still look both ways before crossing the street. You still work to maintain your health. You still try to manage your finances responsibly. But you do these things as preferred actions, not out of desperate fear. You do them while accepting that despite your precautions, bad things might happen. And if they do, you know you can maintain your virtue through them. The transformation of desire that Epictetus teaches requires constant practice. Our natural, untrained desires constantly reach toward externals. We want things we do not have. We fear losing things we do have. We base our happiness on outcomes that are not entirely up to us. These patterns are deeply ingrained, and changing them takes effort and vigilance. But the reward is worth it. As you gradually align your desires with what is truly in your power, you experience increasing freedom and peace. You stop being jerked around by circumstances. You stop living in desperate hope and constant fear. You become stable, centered, and content. One of the most practical aspects of Epictetus's teaching concerns how to understand and fulfill your roles in life. You are not a disconnected individual floating free from all social connections. You are embedded in a network of relationships, each of which places certain natural demands on you. Understanding these roles and fulfilling them with wisdom is a crucial part of living well. But you must also maintain your freedom within these roles, not becoming enslaved to the expectations of others or losing your own character in trying to please people. Epictetus begins with the most fundamental role. You are a human being. This role comes with basic obligations that apply to everyone regardless of their particular circumstances. As a human being, you should use reason, act justly, develop virtue, and treat other humans with respect. These obligations are not optional. They arise from your very nature as a rational and social creature. You do not get to choose whether to be bound by them. You only get to choose whether to fulfill them well or badly. Beyond this universal role, you have particular roles based on your specific circumstances. You are someone's child. You may be someone's parent. You may be someone's sibling, friend, spouse, colleague, citizen, or neighbor. Each of these roles carries natural obligations. A child should respect their parents. A parent should care for their children. A friend should be loyal and supportive. A citizen should contribute to the common good. These obligations are not arbitrary social constructions. They arise naturally from the relationships themselves. Fulfilling these roles is part of what virtue means in practice. Abstract principles like justice and kindness become concrete when applied to specific relationships. Justice toward your parents means giving them respect and care. Justice toward your children means raising them well. Justice toward your friends means being reliable and honest. Virtue is not something you practice in isolation. It is expressed through how you fulfill your roles and responsibilities to others. But Epictetus is careful to explain that fulfilling your roles does not mean losing yourself or your principles. You should be a good son or daughter, but this does not mean obeying your parents when they ask you to do something wrong. You should be a good friend, but this does not mean sacrificing your integrity to maintain the friendship. You should be a good citizen, but this does not mean supporting your government when it acts unjustly. Your primary obligation is always to virtue itself. Your roles should be fulfilled in a way that maintains your character. This creates tension sometimes. What do you do when a role seems to require something that violates your principles? Epictetus would say, you must maintain your principles, but you should do so in a way that shows respect for the relationship. If your father asks you to lie for him, you should refuse, but you should do it in a way that expresses love and respect for your father, even while you decline to do what he asks. You fulfill your role as his child by caring for him, but you do not fulfill it by abandoning your own virtue. This is where many people go wrong in relationships. They either become so focused on maintaining the relationship that they compromise their principles, or they become so rigid in their principles that they harm their relationships. Epictetus teaches a middle path. Fulfill your roles with love and commitment, but always within the bounds of virtue. Be a loving family member, but do not lie for your family. Be a loyal friend, but do not help your friend commit injustice. Be a devoted spouse, but do not lose your own character in trying to please your partner. The key insight is that you do not control other people's responses to how you fulfill your roles. You can be the best parent possible, and your children may still resent you. You can be a loyal friend, and the friendship may still end. You can be a devoted spouse, and your marriage may still fail. These outcomes are not entirely up to you. What is up to you is fulfilling your side of the relationship with virtue. What others do with that is their business. This might sound cold, like you should not care about maintaining relationships, but that is not what Epictetus means. Care about your relationships deeply. Work hard to fulfill your roles well. But do not make your happiness depend on the relationship continuing or on the other person responding the way you want. Fulfill your role because it is the right thing to do, because it is part of being a good human being, not because you need a particular outcome from the relationship. Epictetus uses a powerful metaphor to explain this. When you board a ship, you can choose your place on the ship, look around, enjoy the voyage. But when the captain calls you to disembark, you must leave the ship behind. You should not cling to it or refuse to leave. While on the ship, you can enjoy it, but you must hold it lightly, knowing you will have to let it go. This is how you should approach all relationships. Enjoy them while they last. Fulfill your roles with love and commitment. But hold them lightly, knowing that all relationships eventually end. Either they will die, or you will die. Nothing is permanent. This acceptance of impermanence in relationships is not coldness, it is wisdom. It allows you to love without becoming desperate, to care without becoming dependent, to invest in relationships without making your entire well-being depend on them. You can be fully present in your relationships because you are not constantly anxious about losing them. You can give freely because you are not calculating what you will get in return. You can be vulnerable because you know that even if you are hurt, your essential self remains intact. Epictetus also addresses how to handle difficult relationships. What do you do when someone treats you badly? When a family member is unkind, a friend betrays you, or a colleague undermines you. The natural response is anger, resentment, and a desire for revenge or justice. But Epictetus teaches a different response. Remember that the other person is acting according to their own judgment of what is good. They may be mistaken, but they are doing what they think is right. This does not excuse their behavior, but it helps you understand it. And understanding leads to patience rather than anger. More importantly, remember that their behavior cannot harm you unless you judge it to be harmful. They can be rude, but rudeness only disturbs you if you believe that their opinion matters to your worth. They can betray you, but betrayal only devastates you if you believed your happiness depended on their loyalty. They can try to harm your reputation, but your reputation is not your character. Your character is what you make of yourself through your own choices, and no one else can touch it. This does not mean you should tolerate abuse or remain in toxic relationships. Sometimes the virtuous response is to distance yourself from people who consistently act badly. But you should do this without hatred or resentment. You remove yourself from their influence not because you hate them, but because their company does not help you develop your virtue. You maintain your own peace and boundaries not out of anger, but out of wisdom about what relationships serve your development as a human being. Freedom was not an abstract concept for Epictetus. He knew slavery intimately, from the inside. He had been someone's property, had his body controlled by another's will, had no legal rights or social standing. Yet he discovered that even in chains, he possessed a freedom that his master could never touch. Understanding the nature of this freedom is central to his entire philosophy, and recognizing how free people often enslave themselves is one of his most important warnings. True freedom, according to Epictetus, is not the absence of external constraints. It is the absence of internal compulsion. You are free when you are not forced to desire what you do not have, or to avoid what you cannot avoid. You are free when your happiness does not depend on external circumstances. You are free when no one can threaten or bribe you into abandoning your principles. This freedom is entirely independent of your social or legal status. A slave can possess it fully, while a king can lack it completely. Consider what makes someone unfree in this deeper sense. Suppose you desperately want wealth. Your desire for wealth controls you. It determines how you spend your time, what choices you make, how you feel about your life. You are willing to compromise your principles to get wealth, to harm others if necessary, to sacrifice relationships and health. Are you free? No. You are enslaved to your desire for wealth. The desire controls you more completely than any master could. Or suppose you desperately fear poverty. This fear governs your life. You stay in a job you hate because you fear losing income. You do not take risks that might lead to growth because they might also lead to loss. You are constantly anxious about your financial situation, even if you have enough. You make decisions based on fear rather than wisdom. Are you free? No. You're enslaved to your fear of poverty. The fear controls you as completely as if you wore chains. This is how Epictetus sees most people. They are enslaved to their desires and aversions. They want what they do not have and fear losing what they do have. They depend on externals for their happiness. They are controlled by other people's opinions. They cannot say no to temptation. They cannot accept circumstances they dislike. They are pushed around by their emotions and impulses. They have no more freedom than Epictetus had when he was legally enslaved. Less, actually, because Epictetus could see his chains and understand his bondage. Most people do not even recognize their slavery. True freedom comes from recognizing what is and is not in your power, and aligning your desires and aversions with what is actually in your power. When you only desire what you can actually control, your virtue and character, then no one can prevent you from getting what you desire. When you only avoid what you can actually control, your own vice, then no one can force you into what you want to avoid. You are completely free because your happiness depends entirely on yourself. This is why Epictetus says that only the philosopher is free. Not because philosophers have special social privileges, but because philosophers understand where freedom actually exists. They have trained themselves to desire only virtue and avoid only vice. They have stopped depending on externals for their happiness. They have learned to accept circumstances as they come and respond with wisdom. No one can threaten them because they fear nothing except their own moral failure. No one can bribe them because they value nothing except their own character. They are completely autonomous, self-governing, free. But most people, even if they are legally free citizens, live in slavery. They are enslaved to their bodies, constantly worrying about health and appearance. They are enslaved to their possessions, terrified of loss. They are enslaved to their reputations, desperate for approval. They are enslaved to their families, unable to maintain boundaries. They are enslaved to their desires, unable to resist temptation. They are enslaved to their fears, avoiding anything that makes them uncomfortable. They are controlled by externals at every turn. They have given away their freedom in exchange for the pursuit of things that can never truly satisfy them. Epictetus asks a powerful question. What would you trade for your freedom? Would you give up some money? Most people would say yes. Would you give up your health? Many would hesitate, but might agree. Would you give up your life? Here, most people would refuse. But what they fail to see is that they have already traded their freedom for things far less valuable. They have made their happiness depend on their bank account, their health, their reputation, other people's approval. They have enslaved themselves to these things. And unlike the slave who at least might be freed by their master's death, these internal chains can only be removed by the slave themselves. The path to freedom requires what Epictetus calls ascesis, training or practice. You must train yourself to desire only what is in your power. You must train yourself to accept circumstances as they come. You must train yourself to respond to events with wisdom rather than with reactive emotion. You must train yourself to value only virtue and to be indifferent to externals. This training is difficult because it goes against our natural inclinations. We naturally desire external goods and fear external evils. We naturally care what others think of us. We naturally resist circumstances we dislike. But this training is possible, and it is the most important work you can do, because it is the work of liberating yourself. Every time you resist a desire for something external, you become a little more free. Every time you accept an unpleasant circumstance without complaint, you become a little more free. Every time you maintain your principles despite pressure to compromise them, you become a little more free. Gradually, through repeated practice, you develop the habit of freedom. You become someone who cannot be controlled by circumstances or manipulated by others. You become truly autonomous. This freedom is available to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. The poor person can be free. The sick person can be free. The prisoner can be free. Because freedom does not depend on external conditions. It depends only on your own mind, your own judgments, your own character. And these are always in your power to develop. No one can stop you from working on your virtue. No one can prevent you from accepting circumstances. No one can force you to desire externals or fear loss. These are entirely up to you. But paradoxically, most people who have external freedom do not have this internal freedom. They are legally free, but spiritually enslaved. They can go where they want, but are controlled by their desires. They have rights, but are manipulated by their fears. They have power, but are weak in character. This is the great tragedy that Epictetus sees in the world. People with every opportunity for freedom, enslaving themselves to things that can never satisfy them. Death is the ultimate fact that human beings must face. It is certain, it is final, and it is beyond our control. How we think about death, how we prepare for it, and how we face the deaths of those we love reveals the depth of our philosophy. Epictetus teaches that the wise person thinks about death often, not out of morbid fascination, but as a way of maintaining proper perspective on what matters. Death is not evil, it is simply nature. And accepting death as natural is essential to living well. The fear of death is one of the primary sources of human anxiety and suffering. We know we will die, but we try not to think about it. We push it away, deny it, pretend we have more time than we do. Then, when death comes close, either our own or someone we love, we are devastated. We feel that something wrong has happened, that we have been robbed, that death is cruel and unfair. But Epictetus would say that this response comes from false judgment. We have judged that death is terrible and that we needed more time. But both judgments are mistaken. Death is not terrible. It is simply the end of one's time in a body. Everything that is born must die. This is the most basic fact of nature. To call death terrible is like calling the sun terrible for setting, or calling winter terrible for being cold. It is not a moral judgment, but a natural process. Death is not doing anything to you. It is simply what happens when your time in physical existence is complete. To fear death is to fear nature itself. And this fear is based on the false belief that you should live forever, that you deserve to remain in your body indefinitely. But you do not deserve eternal life any more than you deserve eternal youth, eternal health, or eternal anything. You are a temporary arrangement of matter that came into being at some point and will disperse at another point. This is not tragic. This is simply how physical existence works. The atoms that make up your body existed before you were born and will exist after you die. They were temporarily organized into the pattern we call you, and then they will be reorganized into other patterns. This is nature. This is how things are. Epictetus uses a powerful metaphor to help his students think about death correctly. Life is like a festival. You are invited to attend for a certain period. You do not know in advance how long you will get to stay. Maybe a few hours, maybe many years. While you are at the festival, you can enjoy it. You can appreciate the entertainment, the company, the experience. But when it is time to leave, you should leave willingly and gratefully. You should not cling to the festival and refuse to go. You should not complain that you did not get to stay longer. You should thank the host for the time you had and depart without resistance. This is how you should think about life. You were given some time here. You did not earn it or deserve it. It was a gift. Use the time well. Appreciate what you have while you have it. But when your time is up, leave willingly. Do not rage against death. Do not feel that you have been cheated. You were never promised eternal life. You were given some years, and now they are over. Thank nature for the experience and let go. This applies equally to the deaths of those you love. When your child dies, your spouse dies, your friend dies, you feel devastated. This is natural. You love them and you will miss them. But your suffering is greatly increased by your judgment that their death should not have happened, that it is wrong, that you needed them to live longer. These judgments are based on the false belief that the universe should arrange itself according to your preferences. But the universe does not work that way. People die. Sometimes they die young. Sometimes they die in ways that seem unfair or cruel. But death is always natural. It is always part of how things are. Epictetus teaches a practice for accepting the mortality of those you love. When you kiss your child goodnight, remind yourself that they are mortal. They might not be alive tomorrow. Not because you wish for their death, but because this is the nature of reality. When you say goodbye to your spouse in the morning, remember that they are mortal. This might be the last time you see them. Not to make yourself anxious, but to appreciate them fully now, while they are here. When you spend time with your elderly parents, remember that their time is limited. This is not their last visit, but it might be. Appreciate them now. This practice might seem morbid or depressing, but Epictetus understands it as liberating. When you remember that the people you love are mortals, several things happen. First, you appreciate them more deeply while they are alive. You do not take them for granted or assume they will always be there. Second, you are less devastated when they die, because you have been preparing yourself for this inevitable event. You knew it was coming. You were not operating under the delusion that they would live forever. Third, you love them more freely, because your love is not based on the desperate need for them to remain alive. You love them as they are, mortal beings with limited time, and you accept this limitation as part of who they are. The same principle applies to your own death. You should think about your mortality regularly, not to make yourself depressed, but to maintain perspective on what matters. When you remember that you will die, probably sooner than you expect, you stop wasting time on trivial pursuits. You stop putting off the things that really matter. You stop living as if you have unlimited time. You use each day well because you recognize that your days are numbered, even if you do not know the exact number. This awareness of mortality also helps you face death when it comes. If you have been thinking about death regularly, acknowledging it as natural and inevitable, then when you face a terminal diagnosis or a life-threatening situation, you are not completely shocked and unprepared. You have already accepted in principle that you are mortal. Now you are simply learning the approximate timing of something you always knew would happen. You can face it with the equanimity of someone who has understood all along that this moment would come. Epictetus himself faced death with exactly this kind of equanimity. According to the ancient accounts, when he was old and sick, he did not complain or fear what was coming. He maintained his philosophical composure to the end. He had spent his life preparing for this moment, training himself to accept nature as it is, and now he could demonstrate that his philosophy was not just theory, but something he could actually live by, or rather, die by. The ultimate lesson about death is that it is neither good nor bad. It is indifferent. What matters is not whether you die, but how you live while you are alive, and how you face death when it comes. Do you live with virtue? Do you use your time well? Do you develop your character? Do you help others? Do you maintain your principles? These are the questions that matter. When death comes, if you have lived well, you can face it without regret. Your life was complete, not because you got everything you wanted, but because you became who you were supposed to become. A good human being, a person of virtue and wisdom. Someone who understood what truly mattered and lived accordingly. Money creates some of the most powerful attachments and fears in human life. People spend most of their waking hours pursuing wealth, protecting wealth, or worrying about the lack of wealth. They believe that having more money will solve their problems and make them happy. They fear poverty as if it were one of the worst things that could happen to them. But Epictetus teaches that wealth and poverty are both indifferent. Neither makes you a better or worse person. Neither is necessary for a good life. What matters is how you relate to whatever financial circumstances you find yourself in. Epictetus begins with a fundamental insight. You are not your possessions. Your worth does not come from what you own. Your happiness does not depend on how much money you have. These seem like obvious truths, but most people do not live as if they believe them. They measure their success by their net worth. They feel anxious when their investments decline. They feel superior when they have more than others. They have identified themselves with their possessions to such a degree that losing wealth feels like losing part of themselves. But your possessions are external to you. They are things you use temporarily, not things that define you. You came into this world owning nothing. you will leave owning nothing. In between, you might have the use of various things, money, property, possessions. But these were never really yours. They were lent to you by nature for a time. Nature can take them back at any moment, and eventually will take them all back. When you understand this, you can use possessions without being possessed by them. The person who desires wealth is enslaved to their desire. They spend their life pursuing something that is not in their control, that can be lost at any moment, that never truly satisfies. Even if they become wealthy, they immediately begin wanting more wealth, or fearing they will lose what they have. The desire is insatiable. There is never enough. There is always someone wealthier. There is always the possibility of loss. The pursuit of wealth becomes a prison from which there is no escape. Contrast this with the person who is indifferent to wealth. They prefer to have enough to meet their basic needs, but they do not need more than that to be happy. If wealth comes, they use it responsibly. If wealth goes, they accept the loss without despair. They are not enslaved to their desire for wealth, because they do not believe their happiness depends on having it. They are free to work and earn, but they are equally free to be poor. This is true independence. But what about poverty? Is Epictetus really saying that poverty is not bad? He is saying exactly that. Poverty is not bad for your character or your soul. It does not make you a worse person. In fact, poverty might make you a better person by stripping away the illusions and attachments that wealth tends to create. The poor person can be virtuous, wise, happy. The rich person can be vicious, foolish, miserable. Character and wealth are independent variables. This does not mean that poverty is pleasant or preferable. Epictetus is not romanticizing hardship. Poverty creates real difficulties. It makes survival harder. It creates stress and limits options. These are real effects, and it is rational to prefer wealth to poverty in the same way that it is rational to prefer health to sickness. But preference is not the same as dependence. You can prefer wealth while being able to live well without it. You can work to improve your financial situation while accepting that you might remain poor. You can be a good person in any financial circumstance. The key is not to make your happiness depend on your financial situation. If you believe you cannot be happy unless you are wealthy, then you have enslaved yourself to an external condition that you do not fully control. You might work hard and still remain poor. You might become wealthy and then lose your wealth. You might have enough but constantly want more. When you make happiness conditional on wealth, you guarantee your own suffering, because you have made something outside your control necessary for your well-being. Epictetus taught his students to practice poverty voluntarily, not to become ascetics or reject all possessions, but to prove to themselves that they could live without wealth if necessary. He recommended occasionally eating simple food, wearing old clothes, sleeping on a hard surface, not as an end in itself, but as training. By deliberately experiencing mild deprivation, you prove to yourself that you do not need luxury to be happy. You reduce your dependence on comfort and convenience. You prepare yourself to handle real poverty if it comes. This practice also helps you appreciate what you have. When you voluntarily do without something, you learn not to take it for granted. The simple meal tastes good after you have fasted. The comfortable bed feels wonderful after you have slept on the floor. The warm house is appreciated after you have been cold. By periodically choosing discomfort, you increase your appreciation for comfort without becoming dependent on it. But the most important practice regarding wealth is to hold it lightly. If you have money, use it well. Support yourself and your family. Help others where you can. Invest wisely. But remember that it is not truly yours. It is something nature has lent you temporarily. You might lose it tomorrow. You will certainly lose it when you die. Do not cling to it. Do not define yourself by it. Do not believe that your worth comes from it. You are not your bank account. You are your character, your choices, your virtue. The wealthy person who understands this can enjoy their wealth without being corrupted by it. They can use their resources to do good without becoming proud or condescending. They can lose their wealth without losing themselves. They remain free in the midst of plenty because they know that plenty is temporary and ultimately irrelevant to what makes life good. Similarly, the poor person who understands this can maintain their dignity and happiness despite lack of money. They are not ashamed of being poor because they do not judge their worth by their possessions. They are not desperate for wealth because they know it is not necessary for living well. They can accept their circumstances without bitterness while still working to improve them. They remain free in the midst of scarcity because they know that scarcity cannot touch what is truly theirs, their character and virtue. One of Epictetus's most practical and immediately applicable teachings concerns the practice of attention. Where you place your attention determines your experience of life. Most people's attention is scattered, reactive, controlled by circumstances and other people. They think about whatever problems arise, worry about whatever might go wrong, and respond to whatever stimuli capture their attention. This reactive mode of attention creates suffering and prevents wisdom. Epictetus teaches that you must learn to control your attention deliberately, focusing it on what is truly in your power and what actually matters. The first principle of attention is to notice where your mind goes automatically. Most of your mental activity is unconscious and habitual. You worry about the same things repeatedly. You replay past conversations. You imagine future scenarios. You judge situations automatically. You react emotionally without reflection. All of this happens without your conscious direction. Your mind has been trained by years of habit to operate in certain patterns, and these patterns are not necessarily serving your well-being. Epictetus teaches that you must become aware of these patterns. When you notice yourself worrying, pause and observe the worry. What are you actually worrying about? Is it something in your control? If not, why are you giving it your attention? When you notice yourself judging a situation negatively, pause and examine the judgment. What assumptions are you making? Are they necessary? Could you judge differently? This practice of observation creates space between stimulus and response. You stop reacting automatically and start responding consciously. The second principle is to deliberately direct your attention to what matters. What matters is what is in your control, your judgments, your choices, your responses, your character development. Most people spend very little attention on these things. They are too busy thinking about externals, what others think of them, what might happen in the future, what happened in the past, what they wish were different. All of this is wasted attention. It is focused on things outside your control and serves no useful purpose. Instead, train yourself to notice your judgments as they arise. When something happens, watch how you judge it. Notice the thoughts that come automatically. This is terrible. I can't stand this. They shouldn't have done that. I need this to work out. These judgments are where your suffering lives. They are also where your power lives, because you can change these judgments. You can question them, examine them, and replace them with wiser ones. This requires constant vigilance. The mind's default mode is to judge reactively and to focus on externals. You must actively redirect your attention again and again to what is actually in your power. This is not easy at first. It feels unnatural because you are working against deeply ingrained habits. But with practice, it becomes easier. You develop the habit of redirecting attention. You catch yourself more quickly when your mind wanders into reactive patterns. You spend more time focused on what matters and less time lost in useless worry and rumination. Epictetus recommends specific practices for training attention. One is the morning preparation. Before you start your day, remind yourself of your principles. Review what is and is not in your control. Anticipate challenges you might face and plan how you will respond virtuously. This sets your attention in the right direction before you encounter the day's difficulties. Another practice is the evening review. Before you sleep, review your day. Where did you maintain your principles? Where did you fail? What situations disturbed you? And what judgments created that disturbance? What could you have done differently? This review helps you learn from your day and prepares you to do better tomorrow. It keeps your attention focused on your character development rather than on external outcomes. A third practice is the use of reminders throughout the day. Ancient students of philosophy would often carry small objects or write maxims in places they would see regularly. These reminders helped them redirect their attention when it wandered. The modern equivalent might be setting periodic alarms on your phone with philosophical reminders, or placing written quotes where you'll encounter them during your day. The specific method does not matter. What matters is creating regular prompts to check your attention and redirect it if necessary. The practice of attention is particularly important when facing difficulties. When something goes wrong, your default reaction is to focus on the problem, to worry about consequences, to wish things were different. This reactive attention creates suffering and prevents wise response. Instead, train yourself to immediately redirect your attention when difficulty arises. What is actually in my control here? How can I respond with virtue? What can I learn from this situation? These questions shift your attention from the external problem to your internal response, where your real power lies. This does not mean ignoring problems or failing to address difficulties. It means approaching them with the right focus. You cannot control most of what happens to you, but you can control how you think about it and respond to it. When you focus your attention there, on your response rather than on the event itself, you maintain your power and your peace. The ultimate goal of attention practice is to develop what Epictetus calls prosos, a Greek word meaning attention or vigilance. This is a state of continuous awareness where you are constantly monitoring your judgments and redirecting your attention to what matters. You do not get lost in reactive thoughts and emotions. You remain present and aware, able to respond consciously to whatever arises. This state is difficult to maintain consistently, but even brief moments of it are valuable. Each time you successfully redirect your attention, you strengthen the habit. Each time you catch yourself in reactive patterns, you develop greater awareness. The practice of attention is not separate from the rest of Epictetus's philosophy. It is how you implement his teachings in daily life. All the insights about what is and is not in your control, about transforming judgments, about living according to nature, these remain abstract unless you actually practice them. And practice requires attention. You must notice your habitual patterns, question your automatic judgments, and deliberately choose wiser responses. This happens through attention, through the moment-by-moment choice to focus on what matters rather than being swept away by reactive thoughts and emotions. We come now to the culmination of Epictetus's teaching, to the vision of what a human life can become when these principles are fully integrated. The philosopher, in Epictetus's understanding, is not merely someone who studies philosophy academically. The philosopher is someone who has transformed their entire way of being through the consistent application of philosophical principles. They have achieved a kind of freedom and happiness that most people cannot imagine, not because their circumstances are better, but because they have fundamentally changed their relationship to circumstances. The philosopher lives without fear because they understand that nothing external can truly harm them. They might lose their health, their wealth, their reputation, their loved ones. But none of these losses can touch their character or their virtue. And since virtue is the only true good, these external losses cannot make their life bad. They prefer to keep what they have, but they are not attached to it. They hold everything lightly, ready to let go when nature demands it. This freedom from fear is not mere theoretical knowledge, it is lived reality. When the philosopher faces difficulty, they do not panic or despair. They assess what is in their control and focus their energy there. They accept what is not in their control without resistance or complaint. They maintain their composure and respond with wisdom. This is not because they are naturally calm or because nothing bothers them. It is because they have trained themselves through years of practice to respond philosophically to whatever arises. The philosopher also lives without desperate desire. They do not need external things to be happy. They have discovered that happiness comes from within, from having a good character and using each moment well. They can appreciate external goods without depending on them. They can enjoy health, wealth, and success when they have them, but they can equally be content without them. Their well-being is not hostage to circumstances because they have located it in the one place that is always accessible to them, their own virtue. This freedom from desperate desire makes the philosopher more effective in the world, not less. Because they are not paralyzed by fear of failure or desperate for success, they can act boldly and appropriately. They take reasonable risks because they know that even if things go badly, they will be fine. They work toward goals without becoming obsessed with outcomes. They help others without needing gratitude or recognition. They are free to act according to wisdom rather than being driven by hope and fear. The philosopher also lives without resentment. They do not feel that life has treated them unfairly. They do not compare themselves to others and feel envy or superiority. They do not hold grudges against people who have wronged them. They understand that everyone acts according to their own judgment of what is good, even when that judgment is mistaken. They see injustice and cruelty as signs of ignorance rather than as personal attacks. This allows them to respond to wrong with understanding rather than with anger. This does not mean the philosopher tolerates injustice or fails to work for positive change, but they do this work from a place of wisdom and compassion rather than from anger and resentment. They oppose injustice because it is wrong and because they want to help, not because they feel personally offended or need revenge. They can work for change without becoming bitter when change is slow. They can face opposition without becoming enemies with their opponents. They maintain their humanity and virtue even in conflict. The philosopher lives with complete integrity. They do what they believe is right, regardless of consequences. They do not compromise their principles to gain advantages or avoid difficulties. They do not lie, cheat, or harm others even when doing so would benefit them. Not because they are waiting for reward or fearing punishment, but because maintaining their character is more important to them than any external outcome. Their virtue is not conditional on circumstances, it is their identity. This integrity makes the philosopher's life remarkably simple. They do not need to remember what lies they told or worry about being discovered. They do not need to manage different personas for different audiences. They do not waste energy on internal conflict between what they think they should do and what they actually do. They are whole, integrated, consistent. This wholeness brings a kind of peace that people who live divided lives can barely imagine. The philosopher also lives with gratitude. They appreciate what they have while they have it, knowing it is temporary. They are grateful for their time alive, their experiences, their relationships. They do not take anything for granted. They know that everything is borrowed and will eventually be returned. This makes them appreciate each moment more fully. They are present rather than always looking ahead to the next thing. They find joy in simple pleasures because they are not constantly dissatisfied with what is, always wishing for something more. But perhaps most importantly, the philosopher lives with purpose. Their life is not aimless or meaningless. They have a clear sense of what matters, developing their virtue and living according to nature. This gives direction to their days. They wake up knowing what they are trying to accomplish. Not external goals that may or may not work out, but internal goals that are entirely within their power. They are trying to be good human beings, to respond wisely to whatever circumstances arise, to develop their character, to help others where they can. This purpose sustains them through difficulty and gives meaning to their existence. Epictetus himself exemplified this philosophical life. He was born a slave, but became free in the deepest sense. He owned almost nothing but lacked nothing essential. He had no political power, but influenced emperors. He never married or had children by birth, but became a father figure to countless students. He wrote nothing, but his words have echoed through centuries. His life demonstrates that external circumstances do not determine the quality of a human life. Character determines that, and character is entirely up to each person. The invitation that Epictetus extends to you is to become a philosopher in this sense. Not to memorize theories or engage in abstract debates, but to transform your life through the application of these principles, to distinguish clearly between what is and is not in your control, to examine and change your judgments, to develop your virtue, to live according to nature, to love without attachment, to face death without fear, to be free regardless of circumstances. This transformation is not easy. It requires constant practice and vigilance. You will fail many times. You will forget your principles and react unconsciously. You will be swept away by emotion and lose your composure. This is normal and expected. The practice is to notice these failures, learn from them, and begin again. Each time you redirect your attention to what matters, each time you catch yourself making a false judgment, each time you choose virtue over convenience, you strengthen the philosophical habit. Gradually, over months and years, you become more consistent. The principles become second nature. You live more and more according to wisdom. The reward for this effort is freedom, happiness, and peace that cannot be touched by circumstances. You become invulnerable to fortune because you have stopped depending on fortune for your well-being. You become content because you have everything that is necessary for contentment, your virtue, your character, your ability to use each moment well. You become truly alive because you are no longer controlled by fear and desperate desire, no longer lost in the past or future, no longer scattered and divided. You are present, whole, free. This is what Epictetus discovered in chains. This is what he taught in his school. This is what he offers to anyone willing to take up the practice. The life of a philosopher. The life of a free person. The life of someone who has understood where happiness actually comes from and has stopped looking for it in places it can never be found. This wisdom is available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances. You need only to begin practicing, to pay attention to your judgments, to focus on what is truly in your power, to develop your character. The rest will follow naturally from these foundations. And when your time comes to leave this festival of life, you will leave as Epictetus did, with gratitude for the time you had, with acceptance of what comes next, with the knowledge that you lived as well as you could, maintained your character, and became who you were meant to become, a good human being, a person of virtue and wisdom, someone who understood what mattered and lived accordingly. This is the promise and the practice of Epictetus's philosophy. This is the freedom that awaits those willing to do the work.